And welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to continue with Parshat Bo here. And Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. So we know that we're in the midst of this last plague now. So the plague has struck, and all these young people, or not so, they as long as they're firstborn, they might not be children, they could be adults. Vayakom paro lailahu, Pharaoh got up that night, v'chol avadav, and all his servants, v'chol Mitzrayim, and all of Egypt, v'atahi, and there was sa'aka gedola b'Mitzrayim, a great cry in Egypt. Ki ein bayit, because there was no house, asher ein shamet, where there was no one deceased, there was no dead person. Reason to have a great cry, for sure. Vayakom paro, Pharaoh arose. What do you mean he arose? Mimitato, from his bed. And so I was pondering, what is the sort of the significance of this particular comment? And so I had to really, in fact, as we're talking about it, it occurs to me that being able to lie down in your bed and go to sleep usually requires you to be relaxed and of a calm mind, and getting up from his bed in the middle of the night meant something, of course, terrible had happened. And so I think the idea is to draw a contrast to where Pharaoh was initially when he went to bed that night and what happened in the middle of the night. Remember, this happened at midnight. Okay. So again, I think this is reflective of trying to look at the Bible, the Torah here, as literature, right? And understanding that it contains all these elements that go into literature. Lila, that night. Well, I mean, we knew it was night. We were told that it was in the middle of the night. So again, Lila. V'lo kederech hamlachim. The point is that he got up, and this isn't the custom, according to the custom or the way of kings, b'shalosh sha'ot bayom. Normally, royalty gets up at 3 hours in the day, which means 9 o'clock. They get to sleep till 9 o'clock. That's when they get up. Well, he wasn't getting up at 9 o'clock that morning, got up at midnight. Who? Why the who? Why he? What's the emphasis on the fact that it was he? Because it says Pharaoh already, so why does it emphasize he? Hu tchila, right? He to begin with, achar kach avadav, and after that his servants. So what do we get out of that? Melamed, this teaches, Shayahu Machazer, that he would make the rounds, at that time he made the rounds, al Batei Avadav Uma Amidam, that he over his servants, in the homes of his servants, and got them up. He himself had to go around and wake them up. Ki ein bayit asher ein shamet, for there was not a house where there wasn't a dead person. Yesh sham bachor, so if there was a firstborn, met. Ein bachor, so this, it only says bachorot, right? Ein sham bachor. Well, what about if there was no firstborn in that house? Gadol shebabayit, the eldest son of that home, karui bechor, was also referred to as a bechor. So understanding that while bechor we might understand strictly applying to a firstborn male, nevertheless, it was a broader, the Torah is telling us that it was actually a broader category, that it was also the oldest son in that family. Shenemar, and what proof do we have of this? In Psalm 89, it says, Af ani bachor et nehu. Indeed, I will set him as a bechor. I am not sure if this is referring to King David. King David was definitely not a bechor. So in a way, Bechor also has, I think, connotations of choice, choice son, something like
Does,
that.
does
Yeah,
does firstborn include females? Because if not, why wouldn't the oldest son be automatically the firstborn?
that is correct. It does not include females. So, for
So,
example, today when we have Pidyon Haben, right, we still have the custom or the halacha of Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the son. It only refers to the firstborn son of his mother,
and what's the difference between the eldest male and the firstborn?
because he might have an older sister.
But he still wouldn't. Oh, he's doesn't get a pidyon haben if he's
Right.
was born after a
Right.
sister.
And also
Okay.
Yes,
under
Pater,
certain, go ahead, Judith, say what you
yes,
want.
yeah, Pater Rechem.
Yes, correct. It also has to open the womb, meaning that if there is a significant miscarriage that takes place prior to the birth of this first living child, male child, you do not have a pidyon haben. But it's not a blanket kind of miscarriage. Okay. I again, one has to go into the specifics of the halakha to know, because there are miscarriages that might take place very early on after conception, and that would not necessarily count in this case. So anyway, going on. Right. Goes on to say, davar acher, right? Davar acher, another interpretation of why was every single Egyptian home affected? Mitzriot mizanot tachat ba'alehem. What it's saying is that the Egyptian women would engage in sex, in other words, adulterous relationships, while they were married. In other words, here they were married, Baalehim, right? And instead of their husbands, znut is sexual immorality. Vayoldot mervakim pnuyim. And so they would, in fact, give birth, they'd conceive, and they'd give birth from, uh, meaning ravak is basically a bachelor, pnuyim, unmarried. Of course, unmarried bachelor is, I think it's the Department of Redundancy Department. But anyway, so they would, v'hayulahim bechirot harbe pamim. And so consequently, they would have a lot of firstborn sons. Haim cham, okay, pamim. Haim cham, this looks like chamisha leishachat, was one he could have, they could be five men whom she had strayed with, okay? Kol echad bechor la'aviv. Every one of them would be the bechor for their father. It would be the father's firstborn son. So I don't know that the halacha operates in that particular way, but of course, here in Egypt, in this particular circumstance, the kinds of strictures that the halacha involves are not applied at all. It's a very liberal application of the idea of Bechor. Going on. Let's go on. Vayikra Moshe ulaharon, Lila. And he called Moses and Aaron. He summoned Moses and Aaron that night. Vayomer, and he said, Kumu, get up. So umi tochami, get out from the midst of my people. Gamata, you, Gavne Israel, and the children of Israel, ulachu, and go. Ivdu et Hashem kidaberchem. Go serve the Lord as you spoke, as you said. Vayikra Moshe ulaharon laila, right? He called out to Moses and Aaron at night. Magid, this tells you, Shaya mechazer al pitchei ha'ir, that Pharaoh was making the rounds, right? Went to all the doors of the city, right? All the homes. V'tzoek, and cries out, Heichan Moshe sharui, Heichan Aharon sharui. He's saying, where is Moses located? Where is Aaron located? Gamatem, that is also you. So the gam, remember, means also, so that it has to include, right? Hal-Gvarim, that is to say, the males, Gam B'nai Israel, also the children of Israel, Hataf, that is children, Ulechu ivdu et Hashem kedaberchem, right? And go and serve the Lord according to your word. Hakol, that is to say, Hakol kamosha amartem, just as you stated, because before, remember, I think this was after the plague of locusts, that he said, go. And he said, by the way, who's going? This is Pharaoh speaking to Moses back then. And Moses said, with our old and our young, with our families, our women, etc., everyone's going. This is what this is referring to. Okay, just as you said, velo kamosha amarti ani, and not the way I said. And he said to them, of course, you must be kidding, right? Back then. Okay. Okay. See this. Um, this looks like batel lo eshlach, right? Okay. Oh, yes. He negated, right? He negated when he said lo eshlach, when he said, I will not send. Batel mi v'mi halchen. He negated, he went back on what he said when he asked him who exactly are going to go. Batel rak tzonachem uvakarchem. He also negated what he himself had said, only your flocks and your cattle. Yutzag, right? So Yutzag shall be set up. Gam tzonachem, gam bakarchem khu. So he was saying, your sheep and your cattle take. Umaha kasher dibartem. So then what is the force of what he said when he says kasher dibartem, just as you stated? And this is referring back to Exodus chapter 10. Gam ata titen biyadenu zivachim v'olot. Moses at the time, back in chapter 10, said to Pharaoh, it's not only, we're not going to just take our own animals, you're going to give us sheep to offer up as sacrifices and whole offerings. So that's as you said, just as you said. So going back to what Moses said to Pharaoh in that conversation, he had to basically retract the whole piece, every little piece of it. Going on. Gam tzonchem, gam bekarchem kachu. So, right, in other words, also your flocks and your cattle take kasher dibartem v'lechu, just as you said, and go. Uveirachtem gamoti, and bless me too. So I think we've maybe talked about this before. Whether or not he says, on the surface it sounds like, and in fact, the truth is that Onkelos removes any possible ambiguity. V'tzalo af alai, meaning, and pray also on me, right? Pray too for me. So uverachtem, and bless, because he could have been saying, if you get out of here, that's going to be a blessing, right? And in so doing, you will be blessing me. But Onkelos is clear that he's asking them to, to bless him. Chu kasher dibartem, take just as you spoke. Ulechu, go uverachtem gamoti, and bless me as well. And so Rashi tells us, he pulls it out of Onkelos, hitpalalu alai. Pray for me, shelo amut, that I shouldn't die, sha'ani bechor, because I myself am a bechor. So, going on. But techezak Mitzrayim al ha'am. The Egyptians urged the people. They were very urgent. They urged them along. Chazak, of course, means strong. So in other words, they strongly encouraged them, right? They lemaher, to hurry, leshalcham min haaretz, to send them out of the land. Ki amru, because this word amar so often means thought, right? Ki amru kulanu metim. They thought, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. Kulanu metim. So we're all going to die. Amru, they thought, lo kigzerat Moshe hu, okay, not the way Moses commanded, right? Or his edict, Sha'arei Amar, because Moses said, Umet kol bachor, he said, and every firstborn will die. V'kan, and here, and they're saying, and here, af hapshutim meitim, right? Chamesh or Eser, b'bayit echad, because there are five people or 10 people dying in one household. So they're saying, how come so many? He said Bechor, but they didn't understand that when he said Bechor, he meant firstborn in the way we just read about it. Okay, a little bit more. Vayisaha am et betzeko, the people carried their dough, right? Terem yechamatz, before it was able to leaven. Misharotam, their kneading bowls, Surot, tied besimlotam, in their clothes, al shichmam, on their shoulders. So they had no time to allow the dough to rise. They were so urgent, the Egyptians were so urgent about them getting going. And of course, that is the double meaning of eating matzah, right? Terem yechamatz, before it could rise, right? It could sour, literally. Hamitzriim lo hinichum, the Egyptians did not allow them lishhot kedei to tarry until the dough leavened. Misharotam, right? So he says, interesting, Shairei Matzah Umaror. So apparently Misharotam, okay, interesting. I think Misharotam is sometimes understood as kneading bowl, but the word sha'ar means leftover, what's left over. So it's saying that which was left over is how the Mechilta is understood. And he says, Shairei matzah umaror, leftover matzah and bitter herbs. Remember, that was their command. That night they had to eat the matzah and the bitter herbs. Al shichmam, on their shoulders. Afal pi, despite the fact Shebehemot harbe holichu imahem, despite the fact that they were taking a lot of animals, cattle with them, mechavavim hayu et hamatzot. They held the matzah they had affection, in deep affection, and that's why they personally carried their matzah. So let's see. All right. Uvnei
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Why you described to us like to be kosher for Passover, it can't have any leavening agent even around it or anything like that? It seems like they're holding us to a higher standard than they held the original Israelis, if you will, or
Well, no. Why would you say that, Bart?
because they took you said that, for example, to be kosher for Passover, you can't even have any leavening agent around it. But they
Yes.
had already packed their dough, and they weren't treating it very specially. They weren't making sure that no leaven got on the agent.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. Is this being inconsistent? So whether or not so they may not have had the leavening agents separated, okay? They may have had it, obviously the yeast was in the dough already, okay, at
Right.
a particular point. So yeah, I mean that's a okay. So again, whether or not they actually had put leavening agent in the dough, it sounds like they were. You're right. It is a bit of a puzzle, right? And
A fence around
go ahead. I'm sorry, Judith.
Torah.
Well, no, I mean this is based on what we actually read in the Torah itself, right? It talks about Seor Yelo Bevatechem. I'm not sure if that isn't actually talking about future Pesachs. It wasn't necessarily. First of all, remember, in Egypt itself, right? They were not celebrating Pesach. They simply they weren't celebrating Pesach in Egypt because that's 7 days. They just simply had the very first Seder, right? The very first Seder of all time. And of course, subsequent Pesachs are there to remind us of what happened there. And in fact, it's a nice segue into what I was saying. So what I note is that at the beginning of the Seder in Haggadah, when we lift up the matzah, we make a declaration. We say, "This
This is
is
the
the
word.
bread of affliction," right?
Yeah.
And so at the beginning of the Seder, matzah represents the bread of affliction in the sense that when you are a slave, you are not at liberty to bake bread that's going to rise. Your boss, your master, is sending you out to do your work. He doesn't want you to take the liberty of allowing your bread to rise. So in that sense, matzah is the bread of affliction. But right before the meal, this very same bread turns out to be the bread of salvation in the sense that of what we just read here, that the Egyptians were so that when that redemption came, it came so swiftly that the Egyptians wouldn't let them have time for their bread to rise. And I think there's a deep lesson in all of this. And my sense is that in some ways it comes to answer the most fundamental question that we might ask from a religious basis, which is why did God make the Israelites go through that slavery? Why did they have to suffer for such a long time? And I think that there are certain elements within the Seder to try and answer that question. The other one being the green vegetable in the salt water, right? Because the salt water represents tears, right? Affliction, and the green represents life and springtime and hope and what have you. And I think that there is something about a deep commentary on life and again it's going to simply allude to what I'm saying about the fact that this life that you and I are experiencing now is not the ultimate place, and that the adversity that we face, actually we might turn around at a final point and look at that adversity and say, wait a second, that really was for our own good, that there was something that was powerfully uh, positive, right? That the roots of our salvation could be found in that very adversity, and it's a very powerful way to try to look at your life. And I think that that's one of the messages. Maybe it is the message, of Pesach, that out of death, out of struggle, out of pain, out of all these things, something very, very, very positive ultimately can be found. So I'm glad you asked those questions. So let's see. Do we have a Rashi on this, or did we do it? You have to forgive me. Yeah, no, we did. Okay, going on. Uh, See, yes. Uvnei Yisrael asu kidvar Moshe. The children of Israel performed according to the word of Moses. Vayish'alu mitzrayim, and they asked of the Egyptians, klei chesef uchlei zahav usmalot. So it could mean borrowed, but they didn't give these things back. So, I tend to think that it isn't borrowing, right? That anyway, from the Egyptians, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and I love this last one, and clothing, right? And the rag trade's important, right? So anyway, I love it. So, Kedvar Moshe, right? As Moses said, She'amar lahem b'Mitzrayim, because he had told them in Egypt, back in Exodus 11, Vayishalu ish me'et re'ehu. So, I'm just, maybe this word, I know this word, has also the meaning of borrowing, but they weren't borrowing. They were taking it. So this word, lishol, which can mean request, right? I believe it's spelled the same way, right? can mean request. It can mean borrowing. Does it mean simply requested? Right? They asked of them. Right? Smalot. He mentioned smalot. Right? The clothing. Af hein hayu chashuvot layam. So Rashi emphasizes, right? It says that too was important for the to them, min hakesef or min hazahav. It's sounding like he's saying that they were more important. The clothing was more important to them than the silver and the gold. V'ham'uchar b'pasuk chashuv. Because we have this principle, acharon chaviv. The last is the most precious, and it's saying that the order of things here, right? Vessels of silver, vessels of gold, and the most important, the clothing. The clothing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. We'll take one more verse. Okay. V'Hashem natan et chen ha'am b'nei Mitzrayim. Vayash ilum. So you see, there's this root again, right? So it says the Lord gave grace, right? In other words, in the eyes of the Egyptians, that is to say, chen ha'am means that the Egyptians looked upon the Israelites with grace. They felt very generously disposed towards the Israelites. Vayash ilum, and I believe this sometimes is called, and they gave it to them. Right? They were happy to give it to them. Vayinatzlu et Mitzrayim. Vayinatzlu Mitzrayim means in a way that, well, Rokinu here in the Aramaic, they stripped the Egyptians. They wanted them out of there so badly. The Israelites, I guess, had made the Egyptians an offer they couldn't refuse. Okay.
When you say stripped, do you mean stripped naked or you mean
No,
stripped?
no, strip them of their property.
Well,
Of
because
these.
clothing.
Yeah, no, right, no, stripped in that sense, right?
Okay, yes.
Linatzel in some ways means to take advantage, right? So I kind of in some ways, and they were able to take advantage of the Egyptians, but I don't know that the Torah is necessarily criticizing the Israelites for doing this. I mean, I get those sorts of feelings when I look at this. I mean, this isn't the kind of behavior I want to, promote. So,
Right.
on the other side of it, of course, did the Egyptians owe the Israelites payment for the work that they did? And the answer is yes, they did. For hundreds of years, they needed to pay them for it. They needed to compensate them for their labors. And by the way, there are many laws in Judaism that talk about fair compensation to your laborers. That if they're a day laborer, you pay them at the end of the day. You don't wait till the next morning. I mean, there are specific laws in the Torah about doing that and treating people fairly. And we know that there are many laws that could be referring to social justice in the Torah. Something very good. Okay, so here we go. Vayash ilum. So Rashi's taking this word, right? Yash ilum. And he's saying to us, Af ma shelo hayu sho'alim mehem. That is to say that the Egyptians were giving them even things that they didn't ask of them. Hayu notnim lahem. They gave to them. Ata omer echad. So it's saying, this is the Egyptian speaking to the Israelite, as it were. You asked for one? Tol shnayim velech. Take two. Nem tzvei, right? Take two and go, please. So, vayinatzlu, there we go. Varokinu, right? They stripped them. That's it. So let's see it. And we're going to stop here. It's a good place to stop at a paragraph. And with God's help to be continued at some future time. Okay. Oh, all right, there we are for today. I'm going to stop the recording